Welcome to the Member Engagement Show, the podcast for association professionals, brought to you by Higher Logic. I'm your host, Kelly Whelan, and in each episode, we'll talk to guests whose expertise will help you gain new members, boost retention, and deepen member involvement, all goals that can transform your organization. I invite you to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode, and visit us at higherlogic.com/podcasts to catch the best of past episodes. Now, let's start the show. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Member Engagement Show. Today, I'm delighted to have Christin Berry, CAE, on the show. Christin is the Vice President of Business Analytics and Data Services at ASAE, and I happened to see that she had a really interesting session at ASAE's annual conference in August about how to use data to gain insights. And since we at Higher Logic just released our own data in a 2025 Association Community Benchmark Report, I thought this was the perfect time to have Christin on the show to share some guidance for really getting the most out of data insights. So welcome to the show, Christin. Can you tell our listeners a bit about yourself in your own words?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me, Kelly. I am a lifelong association exec. I've worked in various areas of association management like learning, membership, marketing. So it really serves me well in my role in data analytics and data services. So I bring the knowledge of the day-to-day work that these groups do. And so I understand what their data needs are. And I also can really support that insights because I'm familiar with the functional areas. And recently, we've been having a real focus on providing insights versus just providing resources to our members. And that's what I talked about at the session last month.
I think getting insights from data can be such a powerful thing, especially for smaller organizations where you might not have the resources to do like a ton of external research. And so I feel on the one hand, that's amazing to get those insights. And then on the other hand, I do think there is sometimes a little bit of confusion about what to do with those insights when people have them. So I'm wondering what's top of mind for you right now when you think about how data can be helpful for associations and where there might be gaps in the ways we approach data.
I think the thing that's happening right now, at least for me, is I'm seeing data everywhere. Where before I felt like, oh, here's a benchmarking report, like here's an article. But recently I feel like I've really opened my mind up to seeing data in so many different forms, whether that be connecting with a colleague or using a set of volunteers to dig into a topic. So that's something that I think is really changing for the better.
I think the more that people have tools that collect behavioral insights from their members, the more there is to digest, like more there is to look into to kind of figure out what is happening, what are people reacting to or responding to, what are they engaging with. I'm thinking about how, depending on your different systems, like even today, I was working on some YouTube videos for Higher Logic, and I was checking out to see like which of our thumbnails inspired people to open the videos. So when you have the time to look at the data, that's awesome to kind of see which things are driving the results that you want to see. But I think you've also said that sometimes when ASAE releases a report, folks will say, okay, now what do we do with this? And they're kind of looking for that, almost like consulting on that, because they're not sure where to start with the data.
And that's part of the work that we've been doing with our Insights as a Service. This was a board-supported initiative where we're trying to help our members in the association community more quickly make decisions, using the information that they have. And so we're trying to, instead of just providing the number is 7, we're trying to provide, more helpful information, whether that's, Do you want to increase this number? Do you want to decrease this number? How might you do that? We're also partnering with experts, whether that be industry partners, other associations or association execs, to help provide that analysis and a little more detail than we ever had before. Just to bring that outside perspective. It's no longer just a bunch of numbers. It's how is the overall economy, how is the overall association industry compared to some of these stats. And again, the goal is to help people make better business decisions more quickly.
Absolutely. I think we even did that in our report too. I feel that I had chatted with you about data insights and about how you can't really just like give them the number and then drop the mic anymore. Like people don't want that. They want you to help them interpret the number and what they can do with it. And so I feel like that's something that, especially for associations that might share data with their own members, that is something to keep in mind, that your members want you to help interpret what they're looking at.
Yeah.
But then on our side of things too, on the association's data side of things, like how are we all performing as associations? I think it's helpful too when we have these conversations about, well, what does that number mean in the context of how the association is performing and what you are going to do to change that number if you want to improve it or something.
We're also trying to really dig into how we can use different formats to get some of this information out to our constituents. So as an example, before we did a publication and we sold the publication. Now, for all of our publications, we have a plan from the get-go to do various webinars. We create like written fact sheets on things. We recently this year launched a private large language model. It's called Stellar. So people can access the content within the large language model so they can ask it natural questions, provide additional context to the questions, and get very specific answers. So they're going to get, it goes to our ultimate goal, which is not providing resources, but providing answers to people's questions, providing those insights. I was just in a conversation with my boss, and he was playing with this tool. I think it's called Google Notebook, and it'll actually take a report. And sorry, I don't want to put you out of a job, Kelly, but it actually creates a podcast about the report.
It's okay.
Have you seen that? It's so amazing.
We've played with it internally. Sometimes I've had staff that will take, I think similarly, they might have taken our community benchmark report or one of our email benchmark reports and plugged that in to see. I'm hopeful that the human element will still win out.
It will now put you out of business. But
yeah.
I was just so very impressed that it was able to read all those really complicated tables.
Yeah. So I think that's nice in a space where maybe you have limited resources and you want to be able to have that audio component, but you don't have the staff resources to have someone do a podcast episode. Like I know I said, I hope the human element still wins out, but I do think there are situations where an organization is resource limited, but they do want to be able to repurpose content. What's striking me about what you're talking about is the consumption of information from our audiences, all of us, whether we're an association or a business now, people are looking to consume things in different ways. Sometimes they're looking for an immediate answer to a question. And that's where AI chatbots and stuff like what you were talking about with Stellar, that's excellent that it can give someone that direct answer in that moment that they're asking the question. Same thing with Higher Logic has an AI powered search chatbot in the online community. And it's the same concept there, that when someone's looking for an answer, whether they want to get that from the community and community discussions or any resources in the resource library, you want to be able to give them that answer because they're used to having that now. People are used to having that by being able to ask ChatGPT. And then on the flip side of that, I think maybe in the past, there's been a sense of, well, we released the report or we released the information, so everybody knows about it now, right? Like everybody knows about the community benchmark report. They don't need to be told a couple times. And that's actually kind of never been true. I remember starting out in marketing and having an early boss say something to the effect of, you always have to have that layered iterative marketing. You have to be hitting the message repeatedly or sharing the information over and over in different formats so that the different ways people interact with your organization are covered and that the information is there. So I love what you said about kind of ASAE and other organizations taking bigger things and having a plan for disseminating that in different ways and having infographics or having some kind of audio or having a summary so that if they don't have the time to read the whole thing, they can just read the summary. I think that's the reality of how people want to consume information and data now.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of building on that, that was one of our kind of use cases for building our private large language model was that people are looking for answers. They may not necessarily know it's in benchmarking report A or B. They're not going to know the name of the benchmarking report. They just have a need and they want the need answered. They want the question answered. And so something like a large language model is able to do that much more effectively than like current search. And that was kind of one of our sales pitches for the large language model is that this is going to bring greater awareness to our products and services. Because like a lot of large language models, it uses RAG, which actually displays the sources that it's using. So not only are we answering the question, but we're telling them where the answer is. So it's creating awareness of our products.
I love that you called that out because I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about even as AI kind of pulls people away from going to find the original source at the start.
Yeah.
We know it's like it's bringing web traffic down, for example. Even though it's doing that, I feel like what you just mentioned, that especially in an association setting where, again, if they're a longtime member and they know what you have and they know what you come out with every year, what have you, maybe they know to look for a certain benchmarking report or a certain resource that you release. But if they're newer or they're not a member yet, they might not realize that you have XYZ amazing, huge resource, and they're not going to look for it then. And I feel like everything about online communities, about setting up your technological infrastructure, including AI in that infrastructure, all of that is designed to make it the member experience easier so that members can find answers and find long-term help for what they're trying to do. And what the example you shared is a perfect example of that they can ask that initial question, get the answer, but now they also see, oh, this organization has this report. Maybe I should read that whole report. Or I'm not going to read it right now because I'm busy and I just wanted an answer to that question, but I'm going to flag that to read later because that seems like it would answer some more of my questions that I don't even know I have yet.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we all would like to think that people are coming to our website or thinking of us every day, but they're not. They're doing their work and, they're moving things forward in their own world. And I think the large language model in particular really enables, people to, find those answers without feeling like they need to be part of a secret society in order to, to find these things. The same thing even goes with internal staff. I mean, often I've been at ASAE for a couple of decades. And so people come to me a lot because they're like, oh, Christin will know the answer. But at some point, I'm not going to be here anymore. So being able to have a resource like a large language model for not only our members in the community, but for staff to use to find answers. And we're actually going to be building out our large language model to help staff answer these questions. It also creates a lot of consistency with experience with members because right now, depending on who you get on the phone or on an email, you could get a different answer.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think there's then this imperative to have all of your things organized and in one place. I feel like we talked about this before where you kind of need to move some of your content and information out of silos so that you can facilitate what you're describing, where there's like a repository of things and it is sourceable and it is something that a large language model can pull from and it's easy for people to find. And there's a taxonomy to the information and all of that. Like it just strikes me that's the framework underneath the usability that you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. And I've definitely gotten in a lot of conversations about like, is taxonomy dead? Is search dead? But we won't go there. That's a whole nother podcast.
I mean, I think it's at least helpful. You have the capability to have taxonomy easier too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm most familiar with Higher Logic's products, so I can use that as an example. We have an AI powered auto tagging
Yes.
feature in the community that can be super helpful. That you can do that now. So if you have like this backlog of content, you have the ability to tag it. And I'm sure like other products may have that as well. I'm using Higher Logics because I work at Higher Logic, so I know about it. But that the power to do that and have the information be organized and not have to manually tag now is kind of amazing.
Oh yeah. I mean, we actually at one point were thinking about tagging our own stuff, but the auto tagging is amazing. And when if you're trying to do that yourself, it's so hard because it's almost like one person has to do the tagging too. Because once you get like multiple people,
so it's consistent.
Yeah. So the consistency is there, and yeah, some of the AI powered stuff that Higher Logic, we use Higher Logic in our Collaborate community that you guys are working on, is some pretty cool stuff. And I do think that will really help the community users get to those insights a lot faster than they've been able to do before.
Absolutely.
That's another thing that we've really been trying to do, is to use the interactions and Collaborate to our online, our members only online community, or inputs from Stellar, our large language model, to understand what are the topics that people are interested in, what are the hot topics, what are things we might need more of, or things we might need to produce less of. So that has been really helpful because, as I think we all know, some of the response rates to surveys and benchmarking are really, we're seeing a decline. So being able to use the data that you have, like squeeze every ounce of juice of the information that you have before reaching out, via a survey. So what you're getting from the survey is just those critical things where you can, whether it's shorten the survey or perhaps sample pretty heavily, so you're not like inundating your members with surveys, is helpful.
That's a perfect segue to what I was going to ask you next. Like, I think we're in an era of, there's this question of how do we generate or collect data too? Like you said, if there's people not filling out surveys, or I know there's also kind of a little bit of a bias when you ask someone a question, because if you ask, like at my former association, I remember we used to ask the members if they still wanted the conference guide at the conference, because it was this giant document and it was very difficult to put together, expensive to produce, took a lot of time. And as soon as you print it, it's out of date. And we wanted to shift folks to an app. But if you ask people, do you still want a conference guide? They tell you yes. Like, they tell you yes, but then we're at the conference and there's a bunch of conference guides just sitting there that no one picks up and that we have to throw out. So there's this like partnership between, yes, you do want to ask people things sometimes, but you also have to watch what they're actually doing, because sometimes they tell you they're going to do something and that's not what they really do. So that behavioral data helps influence what you're learning about your member base.
For sure. And in a lot of these tools, the user can say, like, this answered my question, this didn't answer my question. So that also is information that we can use to decide where to put our resources. And actually, the story you just told, it makes me think, like, often people want data to like make a decision for them. Data is just one part. Like, you need the context, you need the organizational strategy like layered onto the data in order to make a decision. So, at some point, you're probably not going to want to ask your members about the on-site guide. You just kind of
you're just going to push them. Yeah.
And then kind of gather data after the fact to see where it fell. And so I think that's it's a really good example of data is one source of information, and the context, your own staff's insights and your organizational strategy have to be layered on to ultimately make the decision.
that sort of highlights the importance of when you are going to collect data, asking yourself, am I going to use this or how are we going to use it? Because I
Yes.
feel like, for example, with evals and stuff like that, especially event evals, at my organization, we used to run into this thing where we'd ask all these questions and sometimes we'd have to stop and say, well, wait, depending on what people say, are we going to change anything? Like if people say, I want you to send me information about the conference by carrier pigeon, well, we're not going to start sending conference advertisements by carrier pigeon. That's not going to happen. So why would we offer that as an option or ask that question?
Yeah, or
So
asking
there's,
people about like room sets, or like,
yeah,
would you like to be on round? Well, if you have you're always going to have rooms that you're going to need to set theater because they're small. Like, don't even
yeah,
go there because I
yeah,
mean, it's kind of like a tease. It's like
yeah,
don't ask
yeah.
questions that you can't take action on. And actually, the evaluations, that's something I'm also trying to really give some thought to what makes the most sense, both as an organization, as a producer of a conference, as well as speakers, because often, especially at major meetings, you might have a very small amount of people taking the evaluations.
Mhm.
And how helpful, how insightful is that, and how much time has been committed both with the speakers and the organization to collect this data, to attempt to analyze it. I don't have an answer yet, but I'm bringing together groups of researchers as well as groups of speakers this year to try to figure out some ideas and do some testing on what might work. Again, to serve both sides, and just make it as efficient and insightful as possible.
That's a really great point. I feel that that happened at my organization as well. We'd have surveys that we would put out, and then we would get some information. But then sometimes you have this question of, well, can we even use this? This is such a small percentage of our whole audience that I don't know that I want to make a decision about our whole audience based on this tiny percentage because these are the only people that answered and we don't know what the others are doing. And I think kind of all of this, both the two sides that you've mentioned, the more formal like collection of data, if that's from like a survey or some kind of market research, and the kind of as you go monitoring what people are doing, behavioral data collection. I think with both of those and like deciding what you as an organization or an individual in that organization want to do with it comes into this concept of data literacy and how we support that at our organizations to make sure that folks on staff and your membership know how to interact with data or when to ask that question like you said, is this statistically significant? Like are we actually seeing a number that we can make decisions off of, or are we seeing a number that maybe gives us an idea of something to ask another question about, but it's not enough yet to do something with?
I mean, I feel like the best data just makes you ask a different question, a
Yeah.
better quality question. So like I said, the best data makes you ask a better quality question, because most things are not going to provide you with a firm 100% no movable answer. They're just going to be like one piece of the pie.
Absolutely. I think that's what always, I have a like tiny pet peeve when my past work was a lot more email marketing. So I used to look at a lot of like open and click rates and be analyzing that data to see like how should we adjust our communication strategy. And in today's era where you have Apple mail privacy protection and things like that, that kind of muddy the open rate data. I hear a lot of people say, well, should we even look at open rates anymore? Open rates are dead. I also don't always love the statements that anything is dead because things tend to evolve more than they tend to die, quote unquote. But with open rates, I feel like if people were using them as like a hard and fast rule ever, that was always a
Not
mistake.
good. Yeah.
They're always a directional metric. They're always kind of to see, oh, how did this email perform compared to this one? Like, I'm not going to actually say, oh, this had 200 opens and I'm going to like swear by that that's actually 200 people that read the email. It's more, how can I compare how these things that I've done compare to how a different thing that I've done? Like if I had a shorter subject line or I sent this at 9 a.m. versus 3 p.m., That's what I'm looking at open and click rates for. I'm not looking at them to say, oh, this is definitely like 200 people opened the email. And I think there's a lot of data like that. Like you said, it just gives you something to look into a little bit more and say, well, why? Okay, this performed better than this. Why? What could we guess is different about these two things? And or what did we specifically make different about these two things if we did an A/B test so that we can try to figure out what resonated more with our audience?
Yeah, for sure. When we first started our analytics initiative, I think that was like the most powerful thing is to see the patterns. Because before, a lot of the reports were, like what I call like true reporting. Like we have 7 registrants. We made this much money, where with the patterns you could see, okay, weeks out 5, that's when we're seeing most of our registrations come in, or we're seeing a big jump at week 2. Let's slice that by where these people are physically located. It just allowed for that digging deeper, asking better questions, where we didn't really have that ability before, because the patterns is where it's at. Like in some ways, I don't even care what the number is. Like I just
Mm-hmm.
want to see the change. And that's actually one of the reports that I'm working on now, this operating ratio report. I'm like, do we need to even show the actual ratios for some of the past years? Could we just show percent of change? Because it actually, that's given someone an insight. Or do we want to use like up and down arrows? Let's not make people have to do math.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something when I'm working on Higher Logic's benchmarking report that I try to think about as well. Kind of, there's some things I think some folks like seeing the numbers in some cases, but a lot of times, like you said, someone just wants to know, like, what does this mean? And the more quickly you can get to what does this mean, the easier it is to digest the information. So you have things like, I find when I'm looking at a benchmark report, for example, I might look at the averages or the numbers to compare my own performance and say, okay, are we higher? Are we lower? And then why might we be higher or lower? Do we have like a very different audience and we expect to be lower because we know that people aren't going to open emails as much or whatever the example is. Like I look at the numbers in those reports of the averages, but then I'm also often looking at the trend lines to see, okay, did community engagement, what were other people on average seeing? Did it stay steady? Did it go up? Did it come down? And then I can put my own performance into context and say, okay, well, we saw a downturn in our community engagement or something, but so did everybody else. So that's a overall trend. So for example, when I'm looking at social media stats for Higher Logic, LinkedIn engagement stats are going down across the board right now. So when I'm seeing Higher Logic's engagement stats on LinkedIn go down, at first I might have a moment of panic and be like, oh God, am I doing a bad job at my job? And then I look at the overall metrics and benchmark reports and see, okay, it's a downtrend overall. Now, what do I do about that? So does anyone know why it's happening? And in that case, it's kind of a continued shift from people looking at brand accounts to looking at individual accounts more often, which is a shift that has always been happening. People don't want to see brand content. They want to see, it's a social platform. They want to see each other. They want to see people. But that's something worth knowing. And that's an example of how I look at my numbers, I look at benchmark numbers, and then I say, now what do I do about that? And in this case, it might be, okay, if people are not looking at brands and they're looking at individuals, then I need to have a better influencer program for my social media. Or if you have email metrics that you're looking at and you see, okay, open rates are going down and personalization of first name doesn't work as well anymore because people think that's kind of spammy now, but they like to see their title in the, like, it's like tips for content marketing managers instead of Kelly, here are some tips for content marketing. Then you can test that and see, does that work with my audience? So like you said, it's kind of, there's almost a fun part of that about data. I know it can be overwhelming, but the fun part is you're on like a little investigation. You see a number and then you're like, "Ooh, this is I found a clue," so
Right.
to speak.
Choose,
Now, what do I
choose
do
your
with
own
this
adventure.
clue?
Yeah.
Yeah, choose your own adventure. Exactly.
No, and I think I talk a lot about just being curious. because you have to have that curious nature, I think, to succeed in these days. It's like, what if I what if I did this? What if I change first name?
Mhm.
What if I remove that? Let me test that. So if you I feel like that should be like part of the hiring process.
Yeah, I was just going to say there has to be support.
Just for curiosity, because that's I'm thinking of like the most successful people that I know in the association space, and their curious nature is probably what draws me to them the most, and I think that's what makes them successful in the work too.
I think it's important for organizations to foster and support that curiosity too. Because you want people to notice things and raise their hand if they think something's off. You don't want people to feel like, oh, I don't want to say anything because then I have to like justify why this is happening. You want to create a culture where people, when they are looking at the data, they want to try to figure out if something's up and that they will bring it up if they need to and say, hey, we're seeing a problem here. I'm not sure why yet, but I need some time to investigate. Or we're seeing an opportunity here. I see an opportunity to take this to the next level. This is a limitation that we have now based on the data that we could surpass if we try XYZ. Do I have license to try that thing? So it's kind of, yes, it's on the individual level. Definitely some people have that curiosity. And I think it's also on the institutional level of if you manage staff or if you're in a leadership role at an organization, that you make it clear that that's wanted, that you want people to do that, that you're not going to be mad if someone questions how something is done.
Yeah, just the organizational culture, the data culture of using data to make decisions. And they may not be the decision that, the group of leaders in the corner, want to do. But I think having organizations that are willing to listen and willing to take the information and make change, those are the ones that are going to be successful. And I do feel like I'm seeing a lot more of that recently. And I think bringing in different opinions as well. I know that over the past year or so, I've really been leaning on our members and our volunteers for input. Instead of, sitting in my office, like looking at the data or, coming up with ideas on my own. For a lot of our research, I've been reaching out to members either, I shouldn't say this, but through surveys or through like in-depth interviews and interact like one-on-one interactions to kind of understand where they're coming from too. And again, that's the whole, like, there's data everywhere. So, be looking for, wherever the data may live, and to be able to share it, because using data to make decisions, it is a valuable skill, and we've seen that in research where people who can use data to make decisions are more valuable employees.
Because then it's not just based on an opinion and it's not just based on your individual suspicions, it's based on what you can see is happening. One thing that struck me when you were saying that is I feel like if you're at a smaller organization, it can feel overwhelming. The wealth of data that you could look at can feel overwhelming. And it reminded me of a webinar that we did with one of our customers, Sophie McGregor from, I believe, the Australian Dental Association. And she pointed out that sometimes she is not looking at all of the data. She's looking at a couple important things. She's saying, well, right now we're trying to grow our mentoring program. So I'm looking at our mentoring. I don't know if that was her example, but whatever things are really important to your organization right at that moment are the things that you need to focus a little more time on. If you don't have the resources to look at everything, you can focus in on things because you're going to have that curiosity that you talked about, Kristen. You're going to need to dig a little deeper on some of those. You don't want to necessarily just take numbers at face value and then check off your to-do list and say, well, I looked at the numbers and now I'm done. So it's important to remember that the data is there not just in its own right, but to give you insights for specific things, and you decide what you want to look at. If you can't look at it all, you say, these are my top 3 that I need to look at right now.
Yeah. And I do think decision paralysis, could be like data paralysis too, where sometimes it's just like, oh my God, there's just too much to look at. So I'm not going to look at anything. I'm just going to go with my gut. So I would definitely prioritize your data sources or your data inputs to, like you were saying, like get to those priority ones, get to the ones that matter the most for the specific use case, and start there.
And tie them to the organization's goals. So, for
Yes.
example, if you have a member retention goal and you know that some of the things, or let's say you don't know what drives member retention, start there. Do you see trends of the people who stay members and what they get involved with? Do they get involved with specific events? Are they very involved with your community? Are they involved with your mentoring program? From there, if you find out, okay, members that stay on tend to be engaged with our mentoring program, our online community, and our annual conference, then you start trying to increase the number of people involved in those things and say, okay, what drives community engagement? How do we get more people engaged in the online community? Is that through using an automation rule to remind them if they haven't logged in, or making sure that our email digests are turned on? And then you continue from there. You see, like, okay, email digests are turned on, but this subject line didn't create a ton of opens, but this one we tested did. So now we're going to further refine that. So it's kind of, again, I'm using a community example. I work for an organization that has community, and that's something that I've worked on. So that's one example, but you can do that with anything. You can do that with any programs that you see are really tied to your organization's goals. Like, start by looking at one number, see what that tells you, and where you can take it from there.
We were looking at actually change logs in our database to see when people were moving positions, and then pairing it up with when did someone take a specific course, or when did they get their CAE, our certification. So it was really interesting to be able to use such almost like a passive data source to understand those patterns. So we weren't surveying people, like, what made you get the promotion, or something that's like, how do people even answer these questions? So being able to use all the data that's available to provide that context, provide the understanding, and again, just use it as like one data point to like a richer data story.
Absolutely. I love that example that you shared, because immediately my brain was like, oh, if you can tell that when someone gets promoted, or they're in this position and they might want to get promoted, they have a lot of interest in our certification program, you could then automate a reminder to those folks to say, want to level up in your career? We have a certification program. It can help you get a promotion. And then you can build lots of automations like that then too off of your data. If you understand your data and what you think it's telling you, you could test automations based on what you can collect about those people to serve them what they're looking for, or what could help them the most. Because a lot of associations have like such a wealth of resources, and it's not all relevant to every member. So that's another thing that's helpful about data, is that you can start to look for the groupings of people that are most interested in which topics.
I thought you were going for like, not everyone wants the same insight,
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, it's like, what's an insight for one group is not an insight for another, or maybe that's not a priority for them. So I think what all of the sheer quantity of data we have layered on, with AI insights, like we're able to get people the insights that they need. I don't know if I want to say personalized, because I think that's like maybe a slight
overused.
But yeah, and overused. But it allows people to grab that insight that they need to make the decision, instead of me trying to like force down an insight, to their specific use case. So
I love that example that you shared, because it reminded me, my organization used to do a workload and salary survey, because our members, there was a wide array of how they might be compensated in the field, and knowing like kind of what responsibilities and what compensation aligned and titles aligned with that compensation was really valuable to our member base, so that they could make sure that they were both on the employee side, make sure that they were being fairly compensated, but also on the employer side to make sure that they were that organizations were appropriately resourcing for who they needed and what type of roles they needed to fill. And when we were asking ourselves, well, how do we make this both a member and non-member benefit? Because we as an organization had a lot of non-members who would purchase things from us, but they weren't members yet. Some of them couldn't be because of government rules. And then we had members, and they usually got a little extra. That's why they became members. And with that report, we were kind of like, well, like members get the report for free, but it's really we sell it pretty cheap to non-members. How can we make this better? And what you just described of making it a little more easy for them to get into the nitty gritty of the data is what we ended up doing. There was like more of an interactive dashboard style report for members so that they could get into whatever specific insights that they wanted most or manipulate the data based on ranges or whatever. And then non-members could see, the basic report so they could understand that we care about the field and that we had that information about the field and we wanted people to have it. But if you became a member, you got that much more insight or that much more customizability of what you were looking at.
Yeah, or even like, just different access levels because,
Yeah.
like we're saying, like not everyone is going to want the nitty gritty, but there's a lot of people that do. So being able to like with our, if they just want this overview, the large language model might provide their answer. Like we actually have our compensation data in our large language model. So like as a single, employee, perhaps whatever I get out of the large language model is enough. But as an HR professional, it's never going to be enough. Like you're going to need to actually purchase the item. Going back to the awareness, and also we don't think the large language model is going to cannibalize any of our product purchases. It's going to answer your immediate question, but it's not going to provide you the context that's ultimately needed. But then there's also this other group that might need to dig into the data in a way that might need a special benchmarking portal. So being able to meet people where they are, where their need is critical.
I know it's not exactly related to the specific topic of the episode, but I love what you just called out about a fear that some folks might have about AI cannibalizing, like, oh, well, if I do upload my big report to, an LLM or to the online community so the community AI chatbot can pull from it, does that mean no one will now download the report? And I think you called out the perfect thing. I don't think that's the case. And I don't feel like that's what we're seeing in the data. Even while you see broad search terms, like quick question search terms, the web traffic goes down for those, you're seeing an uptick in high intent or long tail keywords where someone is now digging into the deeper information about that topic. They are still clicking to that. And I feel it's the same for associations. Yes, you can give them the quick answer, but there are still people and times where people are going to look for the deeper insight. So yes, they're going to sometimes want a quick answer. And yes, they're still going to want to look for the deeper insight in the full report or the full thing at a certain point.
And I think that's associations' role to provide those different levels to meet members, where they are.
Well, this topic, I feel like if it's not obvious to listeners, this topic is huge. Christin and I could talk about data and the ways that an association should use it, the ways they could help their members use it. This episode could be 3 days long. So I'm going to kind of wrap us up, but I wanted to see, Christin, if there's anything you feel like we haven't covered that you want listeners to think about or know, or anything you want to bring up again.
So one thing I would say, and we keep talking about data, and I think often when you think of data, you think of tools or, oh, here's an Excel spreadsheet or a report. But I want to throw out there to use your network, to use your colleagues, to connect on topics, to hear different insights. They might have resources that they might be aware of resources that you're not aware of. So use the human aspect to find the answers to your most pressing association management questions.
That is a wonderful tip to leave us on. getting back to the human element that the data is trying to give you insight into anyway.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, data is just like we've said multiple times. Data is just one part of the puzzle. So don't forget the human aspect, and connect with your colleagues, connect with your network to make the data more rich, and ultimately being able to make better business decisions for your association.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Christin. This has been a very insightful conversation. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your tips, your thoughts, and your expertise.
Thanks, Kelly. It was a pleasure.